Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's eFolder partner webinar. My name is Ted Holsey. I'm Vice President of Marketing at eFolder and your host for today's event. Welcome to the eFolder Expert Series. This webinar series brings together experts from eFolder's staff and partner community for deep dive discussions on key service and technical topics. Today's topic for today's webinar is a deep dive into deduplication, how data shrinks and margins grow. Today we are joined by Matt Dugan, Technical Support Manager for Dell AppAssure. Before we go through today's agenda, let me cover a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded. The recorded version of the webinar will be posted on eFolder's YouTube channel. We will also make copies of the slides available to those who attended the event. With over 125 people registered for today's session, we've put all participants in listen-only mode. You can enjoy the audio portion of today's event by either streaming it to your computer or by dialing in over the phone. Questions are strongly encouraged throughout. We have planned a special Q&A section at the end of today's discussion, but you may submit questions as we go along, and we will try to address them on the fly. After I provide a brief introduction to the eFolder Cloud for AppAssure, Matt will do a deep dive discussion on several key technical technologies in AppAssure version 5. The highlight of the conversation is the deduplication capability. Matt will explore how this technology can dramatically reduce local and cloud storage utilization for MSPs using AppAssure and eFolder together. I will round out the conversation by discussing some of the common ways eFolder partners price and package backup and disaster recovery services and how you can benefit from deduplication. Again, please ask questions as we go along. Before I introduce Matt, let me set the stage with a few comments about the combined eFolder and AppAssure solution. This diagram provides a simple overview of the main functions of the eFolder Cloud for AppAssure. AppAssure and eFolder have joined forces to deliver a service that replicates AppAssure bare metal backup images to the eFolder storage cloud and enables multiple disaster recovery options. This solution combines the power of AppAssure software with eFolder cloud backup and recovery services. eFolder enables partners by supplying them with a managed target core in the eFolder cloud that is attached to the eFolder storage cloud. Partners can scale their business from one client to scores or hundreds and simply order more logical storage from eFolder as their needs grow. With AppAssure images securely replicated and protected in the eFolder cloud, partners can deliver complete backup and disaster recovery services to their clients. Partners have multiple disaster recovery options, including image download from the cloud, priority shipment of the data on physical media, or cloud recovery with the eFolder Continuity Cloud. Now let me introduce today's expert. Matt Dugan is Technical Support Manager for Dell AppAssure. Matt manages the post-sales technical support team for the Dell AppAssure product line from Reston, Virginia. Matt was an early employee of AppAssure, delivered frontline support to AppAssure partners and customers as the company grew, and now is a manager on the team. Matt is the AppAssure subject matter expert inside the larger Dell support organization, and he recently completed a 3-continent training tour to Dell support locations across the globe. Matt, welcome to the eFolder Expert Series.
Thanks very much for having me, Ted.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give you keyboard and mouse control now. There you go, Matt. Go ahead.
Alrighty, so let's talk a little bit about AppAssure 5, the replication side, and deduplication. Obviously, we'll do a deep dive there. But to start, we've got to work on the fundamentals here. First things first, we have our repository creation. Now, the repository is exactly where you're storing your data for your backups. So in a replication environment, you're going to have a repository on the source end, and then you're going to be replicating that data offsite to eFolder's target end. And when that occurs, we've got a repository structure on both sides that remains the exact same format of 5 files, and these 5 files compile the entire repository. Now, one of these files is all of the data, so that's the dfs.records. That holds all of the raw data, so that's going to be your largest file in the repository. When you're actually creating your repository, there's the Windows operating system inherited limitation of 16 terabytes with the file system. So you have the opportunity to create multiple DFS.records files, and you'll have multiple repositories for that one core. And deduplication works globally across all of those repositories that you actually spin up and provision for your source and target environment. So moving beyond the DFS.records file that holds all of your raw data, the other files are actually more or less like indexes that are going to tell you exactly what's corresponding on the agent side that you were protecting, and also what's corresponding in the core repository environment. That way you can map the data appropriately, send it where it needs to be, and also translate it correctly, because our 8K logical records, we write our information in the file system in 8K rather than a 512 Windows standard. So I'm going to move real quickly beyond the repository creation. Anybody has any questions, feel free to just interrupt at any time. Now here we're going to talk a little bit about replication. So obviously replication is a source, or excuse me, it's a paired master-slave relationship. That's in AppAssure 5, that's hard-coded into the application, is labeled master-slave. In Replay 4, it was labeled as source and target. So these are kind of industry standard terms that get thrown around and are synonymous with one another. Pick your poison there. It's no problem. Everybody in-house here understands both meanings. So on the source environment, we've got our agents under protection here on the far left-hand side, this cloud. And these are backing their environments up and sending those backups to the core environment. And then that core is storing those backups in the repository locations. Now, when we do replication, the data comes from the repositories, it goes through the core into the target core, and then from the target core, it goes into the repositories on the target side. Okay? One thing to understand is that replication can be set up in multiple fashions. You can do this one-to-one relationship that we have shown here, or you can do a one-to-many or many-to-one. This means that your source core can replicate to multiple target environments, or you can have multiple source environments replicating to one target. Now, it is obviously WAN optimized replication. That's because we have to send our data over the WAN. Internal replication would be over the LAN. Now, there's no security concerns or performance concerns when you're on the LAN, just as long as your in-house infrastructure is up to snuff. Now, when we actually replicate over to eFolder, that infrastructure is so vast, strong, and fast that we never have a performance issue. We never have any concerns with if our data is actually going to be written and safe in the target environment. Through all the cases that I've been working on, that infrastructure is so robust that it's certainly a pleasure to be involved here. Now, we have a read, match, write algorithm, okay? What this essentially does is on the source environment, it reads the keys for the data. It matches the keys with what's present on the target, if anything, and then it sends what's matched, it sends a response back, and then sends the compressed and encrypted data over for what is missing. So when we're talking about deduplication, we already have deduplication established right here with what we're sending over the WAN, because we're only sending over what is not present on the target environment. Now, what we've got here also, another major talking point, is that we replicate over SSL 3.0 for all of our data transfers, okay? Now, when we're replicating data and we've got an environment on the source side fully set up, and we've had backups for a couple years now and everything's great, and somehow we stumble across eFolder, they reach out to us, and we're happy to do business with them, we need to get our data off-site. There's no way that we're going to be able to send terabytes of data over the WAN and believe that that's going to complete quickly. So what's the alternative there? Well, the alternative is to use a seed drive and copy all of that data onto a seed drive, which would be like an external drive, a USB drive perhaps, and then we ship that physical unit off-site so that we have our data off-site, okay? that's how we go about bridging the gap of performance by allowing us to physically put the data offsite to establish some starting ground rather than always playing catch-up. So here, you'll see a couple screenshots. That's just an example of what you would see if you were to use Windows Explorer and navigate into a seed drive. You would see all of these files that compile the actual seed, the archive, okay? Now, global deduplication, as I mentioned before, it's specific to each individual core's repositories. Now, I'll stress that again, that is plural, okay? So with one core that has 5 repositories, deduplication will exist and occur once across all of the repositories. It won't be doing 5 separate groupings of deduplication. Now, the separate deduplication existed in our previous product, which was Replay 4. This AppAssure 5 technology really stresses the point and hits it home with the global deduplication. And as an end user or an MSP or a partner, you're going to really see the savings and the dollar amount stack up because of this technology. Now, as I mentioned before as well, as compared to the 512 default of a Windows environment, data is written to the repository in 8K blocks for AppAssure. The core runs an SHA checksum against every 8K block. So as far as the question about, yeah, I get deduplication, yeah, I get great compression, but is my data safe and secure? Yes, it is. We're replicating this data over SSL 3.0 encryption, and we also run SHA checksums against every 8K block. So it doesn't get much better than that. And if you are going a little bit better than that, then you're going to pay a pretty penny in performance for that overhead. Now, there's a deduplication cache here, so there is redundancy established. We have a primary and a secondary deduplication cache. It's obviously best practice to put them in a fault-tolerant environment. So similar to a Microsoft Exchange environment where it's best practice to have your Exchange database in one volume and then your logs are located in a separate volume. Same thing here. You'll probably want to store that secondary deduplication cache in a fault-tolerant environment on a separate volume perhaps. Now moving along here, I've got a graphic that I'll use as visual aid to talk about start to finish getting your data offsite. Okay, I mentioned this real briefly a moment ago, but this is really going to drive the point home on how seamless and amazing it really is. So we've got our source and target environments here, and I simplified it with just one object when really the source environment consists of what, like we saw in the first visual aid, is a core, the agents that are being protected, and the repository locations. So this is all kind of thrown into the one jar for simplistic purposes here. And we've got our source and target environment. So from the source, we have our data that's being backed up. We have all of our recovery points and everything that we need to archive and copy them onto an external unit. That is the C drive that we're going to ship offsite to eFolder, and they're going to consume it on the target side. So when we actually do our archive process here, we are copying all of the data onto a USB drive or multiple drives. This archive process can span across multiple USB drives or external drives of your choice. Okay, it's similar. I describe it in the sense that it's similar to back in the day when we had CDs instead of DVDs and then Blu-rays. Now, when we had CDs, they were smaller, so we had to put it in when we're installing an application, and then it would prompt you for, we're done with CD 1, can you please insert CD 2, and then press continue. Same type of fashion here is that when we're done archiving our data to this first seed unit, it's going to prompt us for the second seed unit if we ran out of space on the first. Okay? So we've got our data that we archive onto the seed. Now the seed obviously could be plural, and we ship this data off-site. Okay? Once it gets off-site, eFolder is going to, within minimal turnaround time, plug this into your target environment and consume it ASAP. Now, as you're doing this, you're going to also notice that you've got data that was not included on the seed. That's going to be replicated over the WAN in real time. So what does that actually mean? Let's say you've got a base image and you've got incremental 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? All of this data, this recovery point chain, so to speak, is going to be archived and seeded. So it's going to go onto the seed unit, and that's what's going to be shipped off-site and be consumed onto the target environment. Now, once I actually click or select to start this archive job, what happens during that point in which you start to when it actually finishes consuming the data? Because you're generating all sorts of other recovery points during that time, are you not? You're not removing your environment from protection. You want to maintain protection. So contrary to the functionality of Replay 4, AppAssure 5 actually replicates all of this data in real time over the target environment. Okay, so we will replicate incremental 5 immediately when we receive it on the source environment. We're going to send that data off-site. That way, when we actually consume this data on the target environment, we have the missing pieces to the puzzle to complete the entire recovery point chain and keep it the most up-to-date and recent data for your off-site high availability. So that talks a little bit about deduplication, how things are working there, and getting your data off-site. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about deduplication specific to the seed unit and how we get our deduplication savings in a target environment if we're not replicating everything from the source. So let's say we've got 3 agents that we'd like to replicate off-site to eFolder. We're going to archive the 3 agents' data to the seed unit. Okay, that will be compressed and encrypted when it goes onto that seed, and then we're going to ship it off-site. And when it goes off-site, once we plug it into consume, it's going to consume in a deduplication-aware fashion. So what does that actually mean? Whatever data is present in this repository that we're seeding into, that's going to be deduped against. So if we've got a handful of Windows 2008 R2 environments, let's say we've got 3 of them, copying and archiving the data onto the seed may be a little bit more time consuming than when we're consuming, simply because the consume speeds will be lightning fast. We're going to be consuming deduplication aware. So instead of actually writing raw data to the target repository, we're going to be writing pointers and modifying the hash table. So we're only dealing with indexes. We're only writing metadata at this point rather than raw data. And for anybody in the IT field, understanding how small metadata is in comparison to the raw data, specifically if you're maxing out to a 16 terabyte repository structure, you can imagine how much deduplication we can get out of this. Now, what's great about this for an MSP or something of that nature is you could have, now you need to obviously make sure that you're compliant with any rules and regulations that are set forth for your business operations, but if you've got multiple clients that are in 2003, 2008 environments that you want to send and store their data offsite with eFolder's infrastructure, you're going to be able to reap the benefits of that deduplication. So you have the choice. Are you going to bill based on the savings and extend those savings to the customer? Are you going to hold on to those savings and put it into your profitability and your profit margins? So the decision's on you to make. Obviously, the technology is here. It's fantastic, and you're going to see a tremendous amount of savings on the storage side, specifically with eFolder's target cores. Any questions come in so far, Ted?
Yeah. So Matt, let's tackle a couple questions that are in the Q&A log here. So Mark wants to know any plans on having different retention options on the local and the eFolder target core. So that's kind of a. I mean, I think one thing that's important, Matt, is why don't you clarify retention periods between source and target, and
yep.
and then address the question if there's any plans to change it.
Absolutely. So with retention policies, it's always a talking point for anybody who's dealing with replication functionality with AppAssure 5. Reason being, oftentimes customers and partners and MSPs, they want to be able to have their data in-house, and they want to be able to spend minimal money for the off-site recoverability. And because of that, they want to make sure that they minimize the amount of storage that they're using, because storage costs are usually the highest dollar amount. Now, fortunately with eFolder, they obviously provide a very competitive price there, so shouldn't be too much argument. But with the actual application concern, we do not allow different offsets of retention policies, and it gets down just to the way that the application is fully designed. In order to have your retention policy work on the target environment, you're going to have an isolated environment. And here we don't have an isolated environment. The target environment is fully dependent on the source environment, providing it with data. So the way that it works right now is the roll-up process. Now, roll-up is the enforcement of the retention policy. So what it essentially does is, using this diagram again, if I may, we've got our base image, and then we've got incrementals 1 through 8. Now, let's say that because incremental 1, 2, 3, and 4 occurred maybe last month, okay, 5, 6, 7, and 8 occurred in the month of September. Let's say instead of these being seeded, this is what's going to be rolled up. So when we have our base image and 1, 2, 3, and 4 roll up, then it's going to consolidate everything into a new base image with 5, 6, 7, and 8 sitting on top of it. Okay? If we do this and we have different retention policies on the source and target environment, our base images, the headers for those files, are going to be unique. They're not going to be matching one another again at this point. So when we were working and testing and trying to do a rollout for Replay 4 and really try to solve the pain point of the offset of retention policies and the mismatch of base images and how that would create a need to reseed your data frequently, we decided that there, unfortunately at this time, is no resolution to that. We need to make sure that retention policies are met and remain the same on both sides, and that we put all of our data on the seed to begin with to avoid having to reseed in the future. Now, as far as on the development roadmap, this is a feature request that is there. It's visible. I unfortunately cannot give a promised time or a promised date on when that functionality will actually be released for the separate retention policy on an offsite. It's a great question, by the way.
Okay, and then Robin wants to know, let's see here. I think you addressed this, but let's just ask the question again so it gets clarified. Am I right that eFolder waits to start receiving incremental data until eFolder loads the seed, leaving the client in maintenance mode until the seed is loaded on eFolder's data store? Now will that change with AppAssure, that eFolder will start receiving and storing incremental once the seed is created and begins its journey to eFolder? So, Matt, I think I think the answer is yes. As Matt mentioned, the incremental snapshots will continue to be stored across the WAN and replicated across the WAN while the seed drive is being shipped and processed at eFolder. So,
right. And Ted, I think he's doing a comparison between the two applications. So with Replay 4, we did not have the ability to replicate the non-seeded data over the WAN while the seed was going through. We had to actually suspend replication as an entire job, do the entire copy consume or archive consume, and then once the data was confirmed as being present in an eFolder's target core, then that's when we could flip the light switch back on and turn on replication, which would then start with the backlog of the incremental recovery points that were snowballing during that downtime. With AppAssure 5, we have satisfied that issue. That pain point no longer exists. Okay, so what actually occurs now is the moment you set things up with eFolder and they are ready to receive your seed, you have a source and target drive. Anything else that's not included on that seed, it's going to be replicated over the target side, so that when eFolder actually does consume the drive on the target environment, everything should be up to date.
Right. Perfect. So, and then Chris wants to know, is the eFolder repository one big repository for various client sites?
No, it is not. So eFolder actually provisions a dedicated environment per customer. So depending.
Well, wait a minute.
Ted, do you want to take that away?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably coming down to the the technical terminology of repository, we provision one target core per MSP and then have multiple, and then that MSP may have multiple source cores replicating to that one target core.
Okay, so to build up on that, Ted, thank you, is that you can actually take the target environment and you can provision multiple repositories, and you can actually provision multiple repositories specific to the end user accounts. So as one MSP that has one source core replicating to one target core, you can choose and specify agent-specific repositories. So let's say end user 1, you want them to replicate their data to be stored in end user 1's repository, and then end user 2 can be replicated and stored in end user 2's repository, so on and so forth.
Right. So kind of to answer Chris's question, I mean, yes, the business model is eFolder provisions in our cloud environment a target core per managed service provider. That allows you to then add client number 1, client number 2, client number 3, and have additional source cores replicating to that one environment. And then what you need to manage on the target core environment is the repositories, number 1, as Matt just mentioned, and the amount of total logical storage from the eFolder cloud that is provisioned to that target core. Because of course, as you add more clients, you're going to be utilizing more storage, cloud storage, of course, right? And that's exactly how you pay. You pay on a wholesale basis for the eFolder service in logical 100 gigabyte chunks. So, and then I guess I'm just noticing Chris has some follow-on questions here. So again, the logical question is, follow-on question is dedupe occurring? So if you've got multiple client sites or client organizations that are replicating to that one target core, are you getting the benefits of deduplication across those various environments?
Absolutely. The deduplication is global, specific to one core. So in this diagram here, we have our target environment. If that target has 15 repositories provisioned, deduplication will occur across all 15 repositories as a group, as a pool of data, so to speak, that it will not deduplicate 15 times. It will deduplicate once with the 15 repositories as aware.
Okay, great. And that's really where the huge business benefit comes in for managed service providers is, you know, basically you're going to have a single target core provision for your organization. You're going to add client number 1, client number 2, client number 3, and there's going to be huge amounts of duplicated data that you don't want to be necessarily paying for twice in the cloud. And by consolidating all of that replication to that one target core, that's where huge amounts of deduplication benefit are going to come in, and hence your cloud storage utilization is going to be lower. And that's the main wholesale cost driver for for how eFolder charges your partner organization. Now, what we've found is most of our managed service provider partners are charging the client on the raw storage of their environment on a client-by-client basis. So as your client base grows, you're going to get additional benefits because you're not passing on those savings, if you will, to the clients. Those savings are dropping to your bottom line and increasing your overall margins because your wholesale costs aren't going to be growing in lockstep with how your client base grows or how many clients you add. So let's see here. Couple different questions. So Rakesh wants to know, kind of a technical question, kind of to follow on, Matt, to your example. As a 16th repository is created, does the dedupe process run automatically to incorporate the prior 15? And how often does that happen was the follow-on question to that.
How often does it happen? Anytime we're writing, so as soon as we add the repository to the entire structure of the target environment, deduplication is aware of that additional repository. So It is, every repository is thick provisioning. So you set aside, X amount of space, and it puts a placeholder in the file system with those files. And we simply just write to them, directly to them. And so if we add a 16th repository, it is going to be deduplication aware for all 15 plus the 16th real time at that point in time when it's added. Now, at that point in time when it's added, though, there will be no data in that repository, because if you're adding a new repository, you don't have anything that you've written into it yet. So if you're going to be sending new agents data to that repository, then it'll start picking up and it'll be deduplicating that data that's written to the 16th repository. It'll dedupe that against all 15 other repositories.
Right, and then Rick has some questions around encryption. Can you speak to the encryption technology that's utilized?
Yeah, so our encryption technology is an SHA checksum, and we also replicate and do all of our over-the-wire communications with SSL 3.0. So with Replay 4, we did an MD5 checksum, and that verifies the integrity of the data. With AppAssure 5, we do SHA checksum, which is 256-bit encryption keys. And so I'd like, I'll test any hacker who wants to try to crack that. That'll be a field day. So, it's a good question.
Okay, questions keep pouring in, which is a good thing. Let's see here. So Ben wants to ask a higher, just higher level question. Is the value proposition here that we are using AppAssure will reduce the partner storage costs and will allow either charging the client less or more in the partner's pocket, and are there trading off complexity, and are we trading off complexity for savings here? Finally, are we getting more efficient bandwidth utilization by doing this so that clients don't need to dedicate as much of their precious pipe to the BDR operations? So let me...
Ted, you take the first part and I'll take the second part.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so, in general, eFolder operates an open cloud storage environment, and so we are allowing partners to use various best-of-breed software solutions to do the server imaging, to back up the servers and create those images and snapshots of those servers, and then there's different techniques to actually get that data offsite to the eFolder cloud. The value proposition of the AppAssure solution is there are a lot of very unique technologies that AppAssure uses to image the server, to provide fast recovery, to perform the replication tasks, to reduce the amount of local and cloud storage using deduplication technology. So the value proposition is AppAssure has a host of very unique technologies and ways of doing server imaging and replication and deduplication, and these have various benefits. What we find is that any client organization that has larger data sets, AppAssure gets quite interesting because it's so efficient with this deduplication capability. The replication is also very efficient, and I'll let Matt talk a little bit more about that on bandwidth utilization.
Yeah.
But it's simply it's a different kind of software and has some very unique advantages. And one of the big advantages is that you're able to get savings from client 1 to client 2 to client 3 because any duplicated data between those client environments is not going to need to be duplicated in the cloud, and so you're not going to have to pay for that every time. And I think really our recommendation is drop that profitability to your own bottom line because your eFolder wholesale costs are going to be lower as you scale your client base. And then I guess, Matt, why don't you just talk about bandwidth utilization and replication efficiency over the WAN?
Yep. So the reason why deduplication is so intense with this application is because we want to maximize the resources that we employ. So that consists of storage resources and networking resources. If we have less data to store, then we have less data to ship or to send over the WAN. Okay. With that being said, we need less external units, we need less storage space on the target end, and we could use even a smaller pipe. We don't need some Herculean-sized pipe to send our data over the WAN because the amount of data that we're sending drastically is reduced. Now, this goes back to my talking point with the fact that we're replicating metadata at times as opposed to raw data because that's the deduplicated fashion. So when we're replicating data, if it's already, some of that data is already present on the target core, we simply replicate pointers and modifications to the hash table, okay? And when rollup occurs on the source and target environments with AppAssure 5, the files and the data that's actually going to be rolled up just gets marked to be overwritten. So we don't actually sit there and waste time deleting things. We just flag it to be overwritten the next time we have a write operation in the repository. So that's kind of how we maximize the bandwidth, specifically when we're sending data internally in a local environment and also when we're replicating it off-site.
Okay, great. And Robin has a different question, which kind of goes back to the deduplication process at the source core. He says, where is the dedupe determination performed? In other words, before the seed is consumed, is the dedupe determination performed at the source? So I guess really the question is can you talk a little bit about how dedupe, if you got, say, 3 servers in the client environment and the 3 agents are all backing up to that one source core, can you talk a little bit about the deduplication process happening at the local source core?
At the local source core, absolutely. So deduplication exists when we get our agent data and it gets sent over to the core. The core does the post-processing. So it'll actually sit there and sort all of the data, and then it will determine specifically, am I going to write this as unique new data to the repository, or am I going to write this as a pointer and modify the hash table? And if I do decide to write it as new unique data, because this does not exist in the entire repository, are there any files or data points or blocks that are marked to be overwritten? And if so, that's my top priority, to overwrite what's already been written. So on the source environment, when we have an agent environments under protection, it's sending the snapshot data to the core, which consists of change logs and snapshots that are relied upon Microsoft VSS subsystem. When we get that in on the source environment, the core does post-processing to do compression, encryption, deduplication, okay? And at that point, that's when we write it into the repository, and the write operation may be, instantaneous. Within a split second, the human eye won't notice it. Or if it's a base image and it's the first time that you're actually writing to this repository, it may take a bit of time because you're writing all unique data of the full agent environment for the first time you're adding it to production. That's a good question.
Great. And then Ben asks, is there an AppAssure engine running in the eFolder cloud? Then, is all the horsepower on the source machine? So the answer is eFolder. In eFolder's cloud, we will provision a target core for each managed service provider partner, and then the source cores from your client locations are replicating back to that target core. So, we're actually running what we provide. If I just maybe back up, because a picture tells 1,000 words, but let me go to here, and then I'll fast forward again. But, basically, eFolder is running like a monster AppAssure environment with target cores for each one of our MSPs, and then we logically attach our storage cloud to each one of those target cores. And then you have, each partner has 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30, however many client organizations that are then replicating back to that one target core, and those source cores are talking back to that one core. So hopefully, Ben, that answers your question. That's how this whole thing works, because we're running this virtualized AppAssure environment with a whole bunch of target cores, at least one for each managed service provider. We do.
Also,
there are, just making one comment. There are some instances where you may want a partner may want additional target cores, and we will gladly provision those. The minimum requirement, though, is 500 gigs for each target core. So there is a minimum threshold for each target core we will provision. But there are certain use cases, if you have, say, a single client that's very large, where that may make sense, rather than doing it kind of multi-tenant, if you will. But and I guess that kind of raises another question, which I think is somewhere here in the log. But if eFolder, Brad wants to know if eFolder provisions multiple target cores, does dedupe occur across multiple target cores? That's a question for you, Matt.
Yeah, unfortunately, no, it does not exist. Deduplication is not multi-core aware. It's multi-repository for single-core aware. So if you had two environments provisioned, two target environments at eFolder provisioned for yourself, you would be having two different forms of deduplication for those two separate environments. It would be unique to one another. Now, also, just to touch real quick, Ted, on the previous question, in comparison to the eFolder's target environment and the infrastructure there, I heard in part of the question it was talking about is it AppAssure, is it installed all throughout the target environment. It actually has to be present there for the target environment, obviously, for the application to make the replication pairing. But it also is there so that when you need your failover, you're using our application to fail over to a virtual environment that eFolder will spin up for you. And that virtual environment on the target side becomes added under protection on the target environment. So it remains seamlessly under protection the entire time through the failover and failback operations.
Okay, and I think that, Ritesh, I think that addresses your question about failback. So I think at this point, we've got a couple more. We want to kind of pivot the conversation. So let's see here. What we're going to do now is just spend a couple minutes talking about some of the different pricing models that that eFolder partners are using for backup and disaster recovery, because I think it's helpful if you're really studying the opportunity here of working with AppAssure and eFolder together to think about how you can price and package these services. So there's basically three models I want to share with you today. The first is what I call the managed services bundle model, and the basic idea here is that you have one price per month per client that handles everything you're doing for them from an outsourced IT perspective, whether it's managed service, managed desktop, managed security, managing their line of business application, managing aspects of their LAN and WAN infrastructure. But with this sort of model, backup and disaster recovery or business continuity services are not like a discrete line item that the client can opt out of. The reason for this is that very few MSPs want to be doing outsourced IT for a client if that client is not utilizing their standard business continuity or BDR solution, right? It's just a really bad idea. But occasionally, the challenge becomes with cost-sensitive clients that they want to opt out of certain service offerings, and that poses the threat of dramatically increasing your labor costs over time, because you have clients that aren't really, buying your whole service suite, and that just ends up costing you and your staff time and money down the road. So that's the benefit of this pricing approach: is you go in and do a client assessment. You're assuming, total control of their IT environment. You're trying to, migrate out older technology, put in your standardized technologies and preferred brands, and then you charge a nice, nice rich price every month to handle all of the client's infrastructure and users. Now, the challenge with this approach, of course, is you need 100% client ownership, and that's the big selling challenge, right? Is that there's Sometimes you come into clients where there's an incumbent IT organization or there's incumbent technology you can't easily migrate out cost effectively. So there's benefits of this approach, there's drawbacks to this approach. But I think hopefully, as you've seen today, deduplication is a way for you, as you're adding additional clients, you're going to get cost efficiencies over time with your cloud utilization because that deduplication is happening across those client environments. The next kind of model is what we call the BDR service line model, and this is really ideal for MSPs that view BDR or business continuity as a wedge service opportunity. We have several partners out there that they view the challenge of getting the 100% of the IT spend from a client as a big challenge, right? And that really slows down the sales cycle. What they prefer to do instead is they want to go in and kind of cherry pick off certain service offerings and then over time grow their share of wallet and get more market share inside that client over time. And BDR is one of those areas where there's a lot of clients that have a lot of pain points with their existing solutions, be it tape, be it first-generation BDR services, and there's a lot of clients that are in a lot of pain. And so we have certain partners that more come up with a discrete line card where they look at what are the typical breakpoints in terms of number of servers and amount of protected storage in each one of those client environments, and they arm their sales team with more of a rate card type approach where they can go and say, okay, you have 3 servers and you have less than 500 gigs of protected data, and that's not, or let's say it's 400 gigs, and that's not projected to grow more up to past 500 in the next 18 months. You'll go right in our middle plan, and it's $600 a month. And what some partners are doing with this model is they'll include the cost of the BDR appliance or storage server in the actual cost and then charge some sort of setup fee. This is really good to go in and get your foot in the door as a wedge service offering. And again, the important thing to understand is what your wholesale costs are going to be over time and to plan accordingly so that you have really high margins. The last model is more taking a forecast of what you think your costs are going to be on a wholesale basis and simply trebling them. By taking your wholesale costs from eFolder, that's going to be all of your costs for the AppAssure software and for that cloud storage attached to that target core, and forecasting what that cost is going to be on a client-by-client basis and simply tripling that, which will get you a target gross margin just at the beginning of at least 66% on a monthly recurring basis. Now, Eric Thorsell from Success Computer is the one who's kind of shared with us his thinking around this. His big critique of a lot of managed service offerings is that MSPs are leaving too much money on the table because they include too many features in their service offering, and then they get creamed down the road because their labor costs go up and their margins go down dramatically because they're spending a lot of time and effort feeding and caring for the client. And what he recommends is take a service offering like the eFolder Cloud for AppAssure, triple it, but everything that you might have to do for the client down the road, whether it's a server recovery, whether it's quarterly disaster recovery tests, whether it's reporting, he says charge extra for those. Add those on as a la carte offerings, and what you're able to get out of that is really high gross margins over time because you've got this foothold of core 66% gross margins at the base, and then everything else is an add-on service. So to get your head around this a little bit, how does the eFolder's wholesale pricing work? First thing, of course, is we talked about the AppAssure software. You can source the AppAssure software either from Dell or you can source it from eFolder. Whomever you source it from is who you will get technical support from on the software. There's no arbitrage opportunity shopping Dell versus eFolder because our volume discount schedule is the same. The minimum to get started is 10 servers. So the way you pay for this is we've talked a lot about source and target cores. We do not charge you, the partner, on a wholesale basis for the number of source and target cores. We charge you for the agents running on each server, and that's $50 per server per month. There is a volume rate card if you can commit to if you can commit to 50 servers or more, that price per month starts to go down for those agents that you commit to. So that's the software component of your wholesale cost. And the cloud component is 20 cents a gig, 20 cents a gig basically, but you buy it in 100 gigabyte chunks. So it's $20 per 100 gigabytes. It's a minimum of 500 gigs to get started for that first target core, and any additional target cores you want provisioned. But as we mentioned during the earlier discussion, the main deployment model is eFolder provisions a single target core for your organization. To get started, you provision 500 gigs to it. As your needs grow, as you add more clients, you can add 100 gigs at a time, which is $20 wholesale per month to your organization. The other thing we haven't talked a great deal about, Matt talked a little bit about one of the recovery techniques is to have eFolder spin up a virtual compute node in our cloud environment, which we call the continuity cloud. We include, when you purchase the eFolder cloud for AppAssure, we give you one free week or one included week, let's call it, of the eFolder continuity cloud. So if you have a client disaster of some kind, you need to spin their servers up in our cloud environment, and you need it for 9 days, the first week is going to be included, and you would provision a second week at $150 per week for a medium node and $450 a week for the large node. That's how the wholesale pricing works. So if we back up to those three different business models, whichever model you're utilizing, just make sure you understand your wholesale costs so that you can plan your gross margin profile effectively. So with that, let me just go back to the Q&A log and also do a time check. We've got about 9 minutes left to the top of the hour, so let me just go back into the Q&A log and see if we've got any additional questions. So Jack wants to know, Matt, this would be one for you. Can you talk about what happens with a failure at a primary when you fail over? What is the process of going forward and then going back to the primary?
Okay. So what happens is there are multiple ways to satisfy this requirement for failover. I'll talk about a simple form. One simple form, we'll use eFolder's Continuity Cloud, for example. The moment your source environment goes down, you will be contacting eFolder to spin up a Continuity Cloud environment. And at that moment, you're going to have your agents on the source side, your Exchange box, etc. They're all going to be virtualized in that Continuity Cloud based on the most recent recovery point that's present in the target environment. So the idea here is to make sure that the data offsite is up to date and very current. That way you can spin up without any downtime. So that satisfies the failover method. During the failover method, the agent automatically will be added to protection with that target core. So you will then be sending snapshots to build on the recovery point chain for that environment on the target repository. So when you need to fail back, the idea is that you need to get the data that's present in the target repository back to the source side. There are two ways, obviously, to achieve that. Anytime you're trying to get data off-site, because this is getting your data off-site in a reverse fashion, you're going to either replicate it over the WAN or you're going to send it with seed. So pretty straightforward there. That's a great question.
But as you would bring up the new environment, eFolder can ship you the data on physical media, and then you would bring back up the source environment, and then the agents again would start replicating or doing the snapshots, and then the new source environment or the re-provisioned source environment would start replicating again back to the target.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, Andrew wants to know, can you please explain further the continuity cloud? Is this cloud environment used until a client gets their local environment up and running? Yeah, and Andrew says, just got the answer, no worries. Yeah, but yes, that's exactly it. Matt just explained how it works with AppAssure. But one of the other use cases that we didn't talk about is there's a couple different use cases for the continuity cloud. One is, of course, disaster recovery when you have a kind of site-wide disaster at a client location. The continuity cloud can also be used for periodic disaster recovery testing for clients. So say you have 10 different client organizations utilizing the eFolder cloud for AppAssure, and on a quarterly basis you want to do a disaster recovery test. So you could on demand, pay for it only when you need it, provision a continuity cloud node, and your technicians could go through and do recovery testing just to make sure that you are well trained, everything's working as advertised, so that you can very confidently commit to SLAs with your clients and then achieve them. The other use case is there is a technology in the AppAssure software called virtual standby, and this allows you to stand up a virtual machine that will consistently incorporate all new snapshots so that you have literally like push button recovery. So you would basically, this is for clients that require really, really short recovery time objectives. So these are clients that literally, they can't suffer more than an hour of downtime for some sort of mission critical server or application. What you can use, you can provision a permanent, if you will, continuity cloud node, stand up a virtual machine in that environment, and the AppAssure software, you can point to that and create a virtual standby session. So literally, you can then go into recovery mode with just a click of a mouse. It's really push-button recovery. But that's really for, that's kind of a platinum-plated solution. But we have a lot of partners that are servicing clients that require that capability, and that virtual standby technology is included with the AppAssure MSP licenses. And it's a really slick solution, and it marries very nicely with the eFolder Continuity Cloud. So a couple different ways to use the eFolder Continuity Cloud in concert with AppAssure. Rick wants to know, are there any eFolder side issues if we already have StorageCraft BDRs and start using AppAssure ones instead of a portal MSP from a portal or MSP usability standpoint? And the answer is no, Rick. We've designed the eFolder partner portal has a custom integration with version 5, the APIs in version 5 of AppAssure software. So this is by design. We have some partners that are basically making the decision that, okay, I want to use StorageCraft Shadow Protect for my small business clients and use AppAssure for my clients that have larger data environments. And you can go in and manage all your eFolder services in the eFolder portal, whether it's Shadow Protect BDR, or you're using eFolder Backup for file and folder backup, or you've got AppAssure environments, and you can go in and monitor all of these services from a single pane of glass, and there's no and manage them, very effectively. Now, what kind of reporting information and alerting information you can get from each environment, differs from environment to environment based upon what kind of software you're using out of the client side. But in principle, basic idea here. Matt, I guess maybe a final technical question. Ben wants to know about some of the, what a typical, what kind of typical environment somebody would use to host a source core. What does that server look like in terms of capability?
Are we talking on a hardware standpoint? Or? Yeah,
from a hardware. Yeah, I mean, what's kind of a typical deployment scenario look like?
Okay, so for the core, actually, we stress it very much with our minimum system requirements for the core. For the agent, environments that we're protecting, obviously, we want to satisfy all ends of the spectrum there. But for the actual core environment, it's got to be a Windows operating system, and it's got to have at least 8 gigabytes of memory. It's got to have at least a dual-core processor of 2.5 gigahertz, I believe, or better. And let's see, what else is there? It has to be a 64-bit environment, so 2008 R2 is the most common. So essentially, bare minimum is a 2008 R2. Obviously, physical or virtual environment, doesn't matter. 8 gigabytes of memory allocated to it with at least dual-core processor. Now, my recommendation is as many resources as possible, because that will just allow your post-processing overhead to be drastically reduced. You're going to overload it with breathing room so that it's seamless and it whistles along.
Okay, and one comment, I mean, today with this solution, all of the partners, we have well over 125 MSPs who are replicating today, and they're all building their own basically BDR type appliance themselves. However, in the very near future, eFolder is going to be introducing a Dell branded BDR appliance that we have custom spec'd and will supply to eFolder partners, which will, and there'll be 3 models to choose from, and it will allow you to, and we'll have some guidelines on how you size and scale these things into different client environments. But with that, we're really out of time. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time, and really want to thank Matt Dugan for joining us today from Dell AppAssure. It was a very informative conversation. Matt, thank you very much for making the time.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, guys. It was a pleasure.
Okay, so with that, this concludes another eFolder Expert Series webinar. This is Ted Halsey, Vice President of Marketing with eFolder, signing off. Thanks a lot for joining us today, to everybody. Take care now.